Hi and welcome to this week's Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week we are talking all about inner child overwhelm. What is it, what causes it, and how you can deal with it. Now, do you ever obsess about an imagined problem or worst case scenario outcome? And it goes round and round and round in your head. You just cannot let it go. You can't step back or see any alternatives. You can't calm your mind and think logically about anything. And so the imagined problem or outcome becomes very, very real and very, very big. And so you experience complete emotional overwhelm, fear and panic. Now, if you can relate to any of this, this week's teaching is absolutely for you. Okay, David, so what is your view on emotional overwhelm?
Well, it's something that you create. As emotional, you are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim. Being overwhelmed is your interpretation of an experience that you have created.
So, but isn't it completely natural for us when we are faced with a difficult, challenging, unfamiliar or uncertain situation in our life to experience these emotions?
Well, experiencing emotions are totally natural, as I always say, but emotions should be interpreted. So they shouldn't be what you want to call overwhelm, because you're using a word there that is describing the intensity of the emotion that you are creating. And really, as I always say, I'm not interested in your emotions. I'm interested in your thoughts and beliefs that create the emotion. And that's where it gets confused. I call it putting the cart in front of the horse. Instead of dealing with the issue, which is your belief and your thoughts about the upcoming situation, or sometimes the situation that you've created, as you say in your introductory, it's not actually the situation. It's the worst case scenario. So you've even made the situation worse, and then you create the emotions. And then you want to focus on the emotion. And then you want to give it really important, overwhelming words. Oh, this is intense. This is overwhelming. I'm hypersensitive. This is too much for me. And what you're doing is describing the emotion. You're not looking at the reason of why you created the emotion.
But I guess certainly when we create, I take the point that our teaching is that you create your emotions, you're not the victim of them. So when we imagine a worst case scenario outcome or something bad happening or that we've done something wrong and we start to do this obsessing, ruminating, fixating on it, and then it's almost like it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger in our mind. And then the emotions that we create within us in response to that, are extremely powerful, it's almost like we can't, the emotions stop us from thinking logically, from stepping back. But why is it we go down this route? Why do we go down this path of, it's almost like when we encounter a difficult situation, an unfamiliar situation, one where we believe we haven't got control, it's, for some people, it's like a light is, a switch is flipped and then we go into this panic mode, this overwhelm mode. What's actually going on here?
See what you've just done? So you started off really well. So we're facing an unfair situation. I'm trying to remember what you said, that we cannot control, you see? So now you're looking at the situation and you're going, I cannot control that situation. And then you did the lovely flip. Then you said, well, I'm going to create emotions now. And then you go and focus on your emotions. This is extremely important. Please listen, roll back the tape and listen to what Alex said. So she starts off, I am now approaching a situation that I believe I cannot control. And I would say you can't control any situation. And then you go, oh my goodness, I'm going to create emotions now. And then you create these overwhelming, intense, strong emotional feelings. And so you detract yourself away from the situation and you focus on your emotions. And then you're on the carousel of despair. You cannot put the cart in front of the horse. This is very important. You either believe that you are the creator of your emotions, you are not the victim, or you believe that you are the victim of your emotions, and somehow emotions are generated outside of your body and they enter your body and you are the victim to them. And that's the key teaching of Wu Wei wisdom. When you get that right, your life changes today. Your life changes today. Because if you believe that you create your emotions, then you are accountable for the emotions that you create. Let me just clarify. I am not saying you should not create emotions. I am not saying emotions are wrong. I am saying that you create them. So you cannot be the victim of them. And as Alex says, if you're going into a situation that you perceive to be difficult, uncontrollable, that you would not rather be there, what you do, you create the emotion. And then you focus on the emotion.
Yeah, and I think I can appreciate that if I look at individuals who don't go into a state of emotional or don't create a state of emotional overwhelm when they are presented with similar difficult, challenging, uncertain situations, I can see that there is a kind of a better way to approach these situations. Yes. So why is it that it's almost like we cherry pick, we imagine the worst case scenario outcome, or we imagine we go down the road of believing that we've definitely done something wrong here, or we're definitely going to do something wrong here. Of all the possible scenarios, of all the possible outcomes, why is it that some people have this habit of going down the worst route, the most debilitating route, the most negative route? What's going on here in terms of our thinking?
Okay, so remember, a habit is just a choice that you set on default. So don't use the word habit to excuse yourself. You are making a choice. So to answer Alex's question, this now describes what we call the inner child. The part of your mind that you may prefer to call ego or emotional mind or subconscious mind. I prefer the word, the term, the phrase, the label, inner child. And why I prefer that phrase, it's because that part of your mind acts just like a child. It's childlike. And what it sees is when it was growing up, something happened between that age that we talk about, between 6 and 9, that it couldn't deal with, and that part of the mind locked down. And when it sees situations that it thinks it could get wrong, it could be heavily criticized, it could be shown up, it could be embarrassed, it could be all of these things that happened to you as a child, that part of your mind kind of takes over. Yeah. And you allow it to take over. Yeah. This is the key. This is the teaching. You allow it to take over. And my clients say to me, David, I don't realize it just happens. No. That's what you have to slow down. You have to be aware of that. Because from that moment on, you have an 8-year-old driving your car. You as the mature adult, bringing all your experience, all your knowledge, all your awareness, gets in the back seat, and an 8-year-old is now in control of the car. And now you're making decisions not from your authentic self, definitely not from your spiritual self, but from a part of your mind that's phrased like a child: right, wrong, good, bad, criticism, perfection, failure. All of these things we've talked about in all of our videos. Look back in the catalogue, as in the library, we talk about all of these things, and it's very childlike. That's why I like the term inner child. And the emotions are the perfect example. The child creates the emotion. It's the emotional manipulation because it knows that you will then focus on the emotion. You will not focus on the situation in hand, and it changes you around. Just like a child, when it comes, you go, "Mummy, mummy, mummy," and it moans and it moans and it moans until you give in. And that's why that part of your mind does it.
I mean, I can totally relate to what you're saying there, David, because as you said, when we're very young, as a young child, we may experience difficult, challenging, unfamiliar, uncertain situations because we're learning and growing.
Absolutely.
We're not worldly wise. And our natural reaction as a young child is to go into this freeze mode, is to lock down, is to say, I never want that to happen to me again. And then what you're saying is once we lock down as a child, that part of our mind stays locked down, and that becomes our inner child as an adult.
That's right.
And so the inner child is looking around all the time. It's almost like it's got a radar system on for any possible situation, person, outcome, worst case scenario, possibility, eventuality that may be along a similar line to what happened when we were young. And then if it senses that, if the radar picks something up, then, as I said, it's like this switch flicks, and we allow ourselves to become almost not the adult, not the worldly wise adult, the mature adult we are now. We allow ourselves to slip back into the mindset of that child we were when we were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And we then have a childlike reaction. So we assume the worst like a child does. We create lots of emotions based on all those negative thoughts like a child does. And then we allow ourselves to be swallowed by being engulfed by these negative emotions, these red light feelings.
That's exactly right, Alex, because in those moments, you as the adult are not in control. And that's what you've got to understand. You've given over the control to this 8-year-old child. Remember what I say in all of the videos, this child is not a monster. It's not evil. It's not demonic. It's not out to get you. It's out to protect itself. It believes that there is something out there called emotional protection. And it's running around like somebody gone crazy, wanting some magic fairy, I call it the fairy godmother of emotions, to step in and wave her wand and sort it all out for her, because that's what a child does. Because if it screams and shouts and kicks off what I call a squealing piglet temper tantrum, then somebody else steps in and sorts it out. And so when it looks down the road and it sees, so it may be, with one of my clients, this is what happened. So they've been in a job, they like the job, they love what they're doing, they're very good at it, they think, they get lots of pats on the backs and strokes from the boss. And then the boss came along just 2 weeks ago and said, "You're doing so well, I'm going to give you this extra responsibility, this something else." It was the accounts. "I want you to overlook the accounts," the boss said. Now, on what this was, and he gave her a rise, and he patted her on the back. But for my client, she said it was like somebody just hit me over the head with a sledgehammer. It's like the accounts. "I don't know anything about accounts." The boss said, "Don't worry, it's all very good at computers. It's all computerized, and there's a help desk." And she said, "Oh my God, it was just like I went into a black tunnel. I couldn't hear nothing. I couldn't see anything. And all I could see was, I will get this wrong. I will not be able to do this. I will fail." And then she gave the 3 lies. "I'm not good enough for this. I will not be able to cope. I am not worthy. He's misjudged me." And then the inner child took over in that moment.
So would you say, David, that once we start the negative self-talk about a possible outcome or a possible situation, or once we allow our inner child to start that negative self-talk, so if we use this example you've just used, so I don't know what I'm doing with the accounts, then that taps into what we call the 3 lies. That the inner child, when we're young, we talk about on many of our videos, and I will put a link to our video where we talk specifically about the 3 lies, that I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I can't cope, I can't manage. It's that the situation or the potential outcome creates a seed of doubt within us, a seed of negative self-talk. I'm not going to be able to do the accounts. That then almost triggers these lies we have within our core belief system. And then it's almost like, then we are in inner child mode. Then we are operating from that point of inner child logic, not authentic adult logic.
Exactly. So it's more than a seed though, Alex. I was just trying to stop you because in that split second, and it's like a blink of an eye, the inner child is so clever, it's already projected on what it believes to be a scenario that this lady said. I could see myself with piles of paper all around me, there till midnight, trying to work out the computer. The computer breaks down. Nobody's at the help desk. I can't do it. Then everybody looking at me and laughing at me and embarrassing me and telling me I'm making a mess of the coat. The boss that used to love me now doesn't love me, thinks I'm terrible. And virtually in a second, she'd created all of these scenarios. This is her inner child. And then, of course, what happens? She said, I had to go to the toilet. I was hyperventilating. I couldn't get my breath. I thought I was going to die. Now you see what the inner child has done. It's taken it on, This is what we call the carousel of despair. Now the inner child's out of control. The inner child got the wheel of the steering wheel and it doesn't know where it's driving. And it's looking round desperately. And this is the scenario that she created. And she used words like overwhelm, disabilitated.
Yeah.
I had to go home early. I told the boss I had a headache, which I didn't have a headache. I was cold sweating, sweaty palms. Stomach was churning over. I had to go to the toilet, and she said it was like in that moment, because the boss thought he was doing me a favor. He was complimenting me on the work that I'd done. He gave me a rise. He gave me this extra responsibility. But for me, all I could see was disaster, failure, criticism, getting it wrong. And this is the inner child.
And so we can apply this particular example to so many aspects of our life that we encounter, which are difficult, challenging, unfamiliar, or uncertain, particularly now as we're going through this kind of world crisis, this pandemic situation where this is new territory. We don't know outcomes, and it's very easy for our inner child to jump on the absolute worst case scenario outcome because it can't control what's going on. It's triggering perhaps something that happened to us as a child. And so we then start this spiral of negative self-talk. We start obsessing on the worst case scenario outcome. As you say, painting a very elaborate picture. It's almost like a feature film which plays out in our mind, and that it plays out so elaborately, so vividly, to the minutiae of every detail of how things are going to end badly, that it becomes totally real for the inner child.
It's real for the inner child.
Yeah.
But here's the technique. For the adult you are now being taken along by that part of your mind. And you are. You know you are. Now, lots of my clients will say, oh, it happens, David, I didn't realize. And then what makes me smile is when we go through this, I always kind of give a knowing smile. Oh, yeah, it was a bit daft or a bit ridiculous. Oh, I did that. You know you're doing it. And you don't give that what we call compassionate self-discipline. You never say, I know I'm going to get lots of feedback. You don't like when I say this phrase, but the phrase you have to use is stop it. Stop it. When you get that first thing where that mind takes over, you have to go, stop it.
Yeah.
I'm not going there.
Yeah.
I am not. You have to be what we call the parent. You have to take responsibility. You have to be accountable. This is one of the greatest spiritual lessons that I can pass over to you. You have to be accountable. And I do not expect you to get it right the first time, but I do expect you to try.
Yeah.
That's all I'm expecting you to do. I'm quite happy if you get it wrong. I'm quite happy. That suits me fine, because at least you're trying. Because if you're not getting it, if you're not doing it, you're just being led. Remember in the early videos, we talked about a big dog pulling you around. Your emotions, your inner child is pulling you, and you're making excuses for the inner child instead of taking responsibility. This has to stop. This has to stop, and you're the only one that can stop it. No one else can stop it. There is no magic fairy that's going to waft into your life and stop it for you. This is what the inner child is looking for. They're looking for someone else, something else, external to them, to come and sort it out. And you are the only one that can sort it. Let me give you this as a direct spiritual teaching. You have to be accountable for yourself.
Because if we go down the road of saying, well, it's the situation, it's the difficulty, it's the person, it's the possible negative outcome, that's what's creating my emotions. Then if we believe that, if we believe that untruth, as we said, rather than believing that we're creating the emotions, then we can never take self-responsibility for it. So the first step is actually acknowledging I am creating this negative self-talk, which is in turn creating the negative emotions. I am in charge. I can't control my outer world here. I can't control the possible outcomes with how well I do at the accounting or what's the outcome of this world pandemic. I can't control that. But I can control my self-talk and I can control my emotions.
Exactly. Please listen to what Alex just said. That's the teaching. You cannot control external, but you can control internal. Why don't you focus on what you can control and stop focusing on what you can't control? That's the teaching. And then your emotions will respond. Emotions are wonderful. There's nothing wrong with emotions. Lots of people write into me saying, oh, you're telling us to ignore our emotions. I'm saying the opposite. Interpret your emotions. If you're getting lots of red lights, there's something you're not being accountable for. There's something that's unbalanced. There's something that you've got to return to balance.
Yeah.
That's your responsibility. You're an adult now. You're not a child. Somebody else is not going to waft in and sort it out for you and right the wrongs. You have to do that. Please take that teaching and your life changes today.
And I would say, David, that stop it technique is something we may not have used before, but I think the red light emotion. So if we are all of a sudden faced by a scenario we weren't expecting, it triggers the inner child. We immediately will experience red light emotional feelings. So whether you want to call that fear, panic, anxiety, or overwhelm. And as soon as we get that first experience of a red light feeling, that is the point that we need to step in and say, hold on a minute here. I recognize what's going on here. My inner child has been triggered. I don't want to let myself go down this train track now, because if I let it go down too far, the negative self-talk and the emotions are going to spiral and spiral and spiral and become bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it will be harder to stop what's going on in my mind, so I can get some calmness and I can get some clarity. So if we, at that first point, that first little seed of a red light emotion, that's the great indicator that we are now about to go down the wrong path in terms of our internal world. So we can't deal with the outside world until we've dealt with our internal world.
Absolutely. And that analogy of the railway track is a good analogy. If you think about you coming down the track and there's a fork with a point system, your points are set on the inner child track. So when something happens, like with my client, she gets this extra rise and extra responsibility, immediately she went down the inner child track and the inner child logic. I love what you said, Alex. The inner child logic is childlike. She immediately went down that. So part of this video is to tell you how to deal with that. It's it's two ways. First of all, as Alex says, as soon as you get that realization, stop it. Stop it. You have to take responsibility. Don't keep down the track because you've got farther to come back. Stop it immediately. If you've got to go to the toilet, if you've got to go in a different room, if you've got to do some meditation, if you've got to run around the block, whatever you need to do, everyone's different. You stop it. You say, I am not going down this inner child track any farther, because this will just land, as Alex said, in the carousel of despair. More intense feelings, more upset, more drugs, more drinking, more eating cakes, more whatever. You're just going down and down and down and down. You've got to stop it. Now, the second path, you've now got to retrace your path back to the fork, before the fork. Now, this is what this is what my clients have the most difficulty with, and this is what I work on them with. Your points have been set to the inner child. So it's almost like you don't even realize that the fork in the track. So we have to reset the points. So the next time you go down the authentic spiritual path, and that's why it's a two-path way. First of all, when you're in it, you've already gone down the track. Stop. Don't go any further. Stop it. And do whatever you need to do, whether that's, as I say, doing some exercise, doing some stretching, doing some breathing, doing something just to stop yourself going farther. Then retrace yourself back to the beginning and say, what did I misunderstand here? What is reset here? This is the Wu Wei teaching.
Because I guess if we go down the inner child logic route or the inner child path, all the inner child wants to do is paint that vivid picture of the worst case scenario outcome, the worst outcome, the worst way we're going to deal with it, all the bad things that are going to happen to us, and create that overwhelm, because the overwhelm then acts as a distraction for us. It also gives us an excuse, because if we create tremendous emotional overwhelm within ourselves, such that we're totally debilitated mentally, emotionally, and physically, we have to go to bed, we're not feeling well, then that gives us, in a way, an excuse to duck out of facing up to the problem. Or it makes it so bad that we're hoping that maybe someone else will come in and step in for us. Because although that sounds crazy and it sounds manipulative, as a child, that's what we did, because that's the natural thing to do. We knew when we were uncertain, when we were having difficulties as a child, we would kind of get all het up and scream out and expect our mummy and daddy to rush in and sort the problem out for us.
Or someone else.
Or if we screamed enough or we had a temper tantrum enough, that somehow the problem would be whisked away from us. And I suppose now, as an adult, when we switch into this inner child mode, we go back to the mindset of us as 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. We're kind of expecting the same thing to happen as when we were a child, but that's not reality.
Exactly. And that's why you have to go back prior to the fork in the road. And this is why we try and make it simple. As you can see, one of the tricks that the inner child does is to complicate things. It loves complications. It loves the paradox. It loves saying one thing and doing something else. You have to go back before the fork, and you have to really meditate on these two things. I am the creator of my emotions. I am not the victim of them, and I am accountable for my beliefs. So this is the work I do with my clients. I'm not interested in your emotions. I'm interested in what you believe, what you think, your thought patterns, your paradigm. That's what you have to change. So you won't change that when you're down the track, because the emotions are already in play. That's the wrong time. What you have to do is to stop, retrace, that's the golden thread, go back to the beginning before the point system, because we have to change the point system. We have to get rid of that path. So the only path you're walking on is your true, authentic, spiritual path. Then your logic will be more adult, more authentic, more spiritual, I would say, because this path will not be available to you. And that goes back to those two simple things. I am accountable for my beliefs. What I believe, I can stand in front of anyone and tell them what I believe and why I believe it. How many times do you hear me say that?
So in the example of the client who was giving the extra responsibility to do the accounts for her business, which she was unfamiliar with, and the inner child kicked in and says, I'm not going to be able to do this, I can't cope, people will realize I'm not good enough, all that negative self-talk, hooking into those lies. You say, use the stop it technique to stop the spiral of negative self-talk and thus the spiral of the negative red light emotional feelings. Go back to the start, go back to the kind of junction point. So we're now back at the situation where the boss has just given us this extra responsibility. Now, you say, examine the beliefs, be accountable for the beliefs. So in this scenario, what you're saying is your client needs to acknowledge that there are some core beliefs that she is still holding on to, like I'm not good enough, I'm not going to be able to cope and manage, that are going to come into play now if she's not careful.
Exactly.
This situation, which is a real situation, is now going to trigger those inauthentic beliefs that she's still holding on to. So she needs to sort out those beliefs in order to be able to respond authentically to this situation.
Exactly, Alex. And that's where the real work takes place. That's where the spiritual lessons are really learned. Because on that client, she still believes that she's going to be found out. She still believes that there's something wrong with her. Even though we've already done 1 or 2 sessions and she said it's not true, but there's the evidence that it is true. So these beliefs are very deep. That's why sometimes you need help with someone else, because you can even lie to yourself. These beliefs are so deep. So let me run that scenario. When the boss came in and gave her the rise, which she was very grateful for and she wanted, especially in these times, and gave her this extra job, instead of saying, thank you, boss, I really appreciate that, let me have a look at this. Let me make sure that I am capable of doing it. I know you believe I am, but I may need to go on a course, or I may need some extra tuition, or I may need somebody to take another part of my job off me until I get right onto this part of my job. There are many scenarios she could have said, but she cannot say any of those because the forks are set. And you have to go back prior to the fork and reset that core belief. That's where I have to do the work. That's what the golden thread is, going down and do the work. Because here's the truth. It's no good just getting over this one problem and think it's solved. It's not solved, because farther down the track, there's going to be another problem.
Yeah.
And then she'll react in exactly the same way. And then this becomes familiar. So this is why this is such an important teaching. You have to go back to those core beliefs. The core vow, there's something wrong with me. I'm going to be found out. I'm not like other people. And then the 3 lies that support it. I'm not good enough. I can't cope. I'm unworthy, or I'm unlovable. If you've said any of those 3 lies, then you have a vow deep in your subconscious mind that's been there right from a child, from 6 to 9 years old, that you probably don't even realize is still there. But the evidence that shows me on this lady, lovely lady, and we're doing the work, and I'm really sure in 1 or 2 sessions, she'll be able to change that core belief. But you've got to find it and you've got to own it. You've got to be accountable for that core belief. So her core belief is, I will be found out. There is something wrong with me, David. Then great. So I disagree with you, of course. Please prove there's something wrong with me. So that's what she's gone away to find out. She's now going to prove to me that there's something basically wrong with her. I know she won't, and you know she won't, and she knows she won't. But she still wants to go and try and find out. And that's where it's left. So I'm looking forward to our next session, because she's going to come in and prove to me there's something wrong with her. And there's not. And then that's the realization. You've got to dig down. It's like digging down and uncovering a diamond. You've got to look at it. You can't. Here comes a wonderful Taoist saying, You cannot change what you don't understand. And these beliefs are so deep in your subconscious mind, so deep in that inner child. Nobody's ever questioned them until I question them. And I know when I question them, the first response for the inner child is to push back, is to be angry, to say, you don't know what you're talking about. But I do know what I'm talking about. And I don't see the inner child as a monster. And you've got to get to those core beliefs.
And I think the first time you, rather than going down the familiar track of following the inner child, stepping into that inner child mode, stepping into the inner child logic, having the moments, having the emotional overwhelm, getting into panic mode, rather than doing that, using the stop it technique, trying to backtrack, get back to the junction, and then explore and root out those core beliefs. The first time you do that, the inner child will resist. My goodness, the inner child, because the inner child within us truly believes, by virtue of the scenario, the vivid scenario it's painted in its mind, that this is going to end in disaster. I will be exposed. Absolutely. Everything's going to go wrong.
Absolutely.
It's like the inner child is so wedded to that.
Absolutely.
So the first time you do it, you really have to use all those inner child reparenting techniques. You also have to understand all the strategies that the inner child will use on you to try and keep you on the familiar path. And we've done so many videos. And at the end of this teaching, I will put a link to our inner child playlist, so you can go through all those videos, so you'll understand all the inner child tactics and strategies, and you'll understand all the inner child reparenting techniques that you will need to put in place as you go through this process.
So there's two things there, Alex. Number one, that's what I love about my job. I love meeting the inner child. The inner child is very resourceful, very willful. It will stick to it. It's very clever. I love it. It's so important because it's trying to cover up that. Number two, it's so important for you to do this. When my clients, I disarm them when I say, I do not want to talk about your emotions. Don't tell me about your feelings. Tell me about your beliefs. Tell me about what you think and why you think that. And that's what disarms them, because this is the first time, because that part of your mind does not want to be accountable. That's what the inner child is trying to move the accountability onto someone else, onto something else. Because let me show you, when we do this and the inner child is found out and found to be rude, whenever is that part of your mind that we're calling the inner child, put their hands up and says, oh my goodness, you're right. I'm so sorry. I led you the wrong way. Oh, it's my mistake. The inner child has never done that to you. You know what it does? It blames you. That's how bizarre this is. The inner child does not want to be accountable for anything.
Yeah.
And that's what it does this trick for. And it is a trick. It's a game. And you have to understand the game. And the game can be changed very quickly when you become accountable, when you take responsibility for your beliefs and why you believe them.
I mean, that resonates so strongly with me, this idea, because as a child, we weren't accountable because people did step in and show us what to do, sort out problems for us, or take problems away from us before we even encountered them. So in inner child mode, we still default to not wanting to be accountable for dealing with situations. And I wanted to say one other thing.
Let me just say one thing, because I can see what you guys are saying. Oh, well, I'm accountable for everything. This is why the inner child creates the emotions, because then you can blame the emotions. That's why your inner child does not want to be accountable for their emotions. Many of my clients, Alex, will say, intellectually, David, I know and I agree with what you're saying. Maturely, I know I create my emotions. But this part of the mind that we're calling the inner child will not accept that. And this is the reason. For those of you who said, oh, well, when I was a child, I was accountable for everything. But the inner child does not want to be accountable. That's why it creates the emotions, because then you can blame the emotion.
And it gets you off the hook.
It gets you off the hook. Well, it's not me. It's because I was overwhelmed. It's because I'm hypersensitive. It's because I'm too weak. It's because, see, it's always looking to blame someone else. That's why the inner child will not want to take accountability for creating emotional feelings. Because when it does that, their story falls apart. It only can maintain it if he says, well, I had to do it because I was overwhelmed.
Yeah. Or I had to step away from this job opportunity or this raise or extra responsibility at work because it was just too much for me. It was keeping me awake at night.
That's it.
And I'd rather stay small and play small.
I keep my head under the parapet. How many of you do? How many of you do this? Keep your head under the parapet. And this is the inner child. And then I can blame. So when you say to the inner child, so why do you want to keep your head under the parapet? The inner child says, well, it's the emotions. It's these emotions. I'm trying to avoid the emotions. Yeah. I don't want to experience fear. That's when it uses the word. So if you use these words, this is you. I want to be emotionally safe. Yeah. I'm looking for safety. I want to be protected. This is the inner child. Blaming the emotions now, not being accountable, putting the accountability onto the emotions.
And I think that touches upon the other thing I was going to say, as well as accountability. So the inner child route, inner child logic, inner child path is one of non-accountability. Yes. Blaming other people, other situations, the external world, and hoping that someone's going to step in and sort the problem out. The authentic adult path that you're suggesting that we get back to the junction and go down the route where we question our beliefs, make sure they're authentic and truthful. That is one of emotional self-responsibility and accountability.
Yes. And that's what I would call the Shen path. That's you walking your path, learning your lessons. And if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough, because we only learn by making mistakes. So it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake as long as you learn what went wrong. And that's the other path. That's the other railway track that I want you to go down. And that's you being accountable, saying, hey, I made a mistake there, but I've learned my lesson now. I won't make it again. And that's this is the conversation I had with my client, doing the accounts, trying it when you get stuck, asking for help. The boss has told you there's a help desk there you can phone up. And I said, oh, you can never get through to those help desks. And I said, have you tried? No. Well, try. And then you can go to your boss and say, hey, you told me there's a help desk, but I can never get through to them. So you need to send me away on a course, or you need to give me more training. Why don't you do that? And she said, oh, I never thought of that.
But if we are operating in the inner child mode where we believe we have to be perfect, that we can't make any mistakes, or that the world should not present us with any difficulties or challenges, all the kind of faulty inner child logic, we cannot go down that authentic path, because in the example you give, it's perfectly okay to say, I'm not perfect at accounts. I can ask for help. I can ask questions. I'm not going to be great at this on day one, but I work through it step by step by step. But if we're tied into the inner child logic of everything must be fine on day one, nothing can go wrong, I must be absolutely perfect, it's like we're pulling apart. It's the dual belief system.
Absolutely. And when I suggested that to her, and I said, you just imagine that when you get this extra training, now you've got this extra bonus, now you've got something else to put on your CV. Now you can say, I have been trained at this. Now your worth goes up. And she said, that never even came into my mind. And I said, but that's what you've got to consider. That's why it's no good just stopping it. Because if you just stop it, there's a lot of my clients will say to me, David, the stop it technique, it doesn't work. And I say, how so? Well, it stopped it in that moment, but 2 days later, I was back in the same thing, because you haven't retraced back and corrected the belief system. That's the real work. The real work I do with my clients is on their core beliefs. I am not trying to convince them to follow my beliefs. They have to be accountable for their beliefs. That's the key. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? That's as simple as that. It can't, we try and make things simple. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? It's as simple as that. Where did that belief come from? You wasn't born with that belief. Where did it come from? Do you want to own that belief? And I would say the majority of my clients have a belief system that is not even their belief system. It's inherited ad hoc from their parents, from their teachers, from their siblings, from their friends, from whoever. As they've grown up, they've just cherry-picked the belief, and they don't even own their own belief. Please sit down with a pen and paper and say, what do I believe? What do I believe? Do 2 columns. What do I believe? Why do I believe that? And then that will clarify your belief system. That's before the fork. And then that will stop you going down the inner child path.
So for your client with the accountancy role, if she believes she needs to be perfect, if she believes that she can't get anything wrong, if she believes it's going to all go wrong, then she needs to justify and prove
Absolutely.
the original evidence that she's not going to be good enough, that she needs to be perfect. She
Amen.
has to do that work, because I tell you what, I mean, this is all, everything you've talked about there with examining the beliefs, questioning the beliefs, interrogating them, getting back to the original evidence and questioning it. That's all the golden thread process therapy work we teach. And again, I can put a link to a playlist at the end of this teaching where you can learn much more about how to do that work. But what I think, David, a lot of people spend their whole life going down the inner child route, creating the emotional overwhelm. They'll either get out of the emotional overwhelm by either running away from the situation, so they play small, play safe, they don't progress in their life, so they run away from the situation or the person, or they just kind of hide their light under a bushel, or they just don't live their potential. But then the emotions will subside, but then they don't do anything about the core beliefs.
Exactly.
So they do the first bit, which was to, I guess, stop it, get rid of the emotions. Whether for some people it might be eating a cream cake or having a strong, a glass of wine or 2 or a beer at night to just get rid of the emotions, to make themselves feel better. Or they'll step away, they'll run away from the situation altogether. So they'll say, oh no, I don't want the rise, I don't want the responsibility. They play small.
Yep.
So the emotions subside, but they never do the second stage of the work, which is to look at the beliefs.
Absolutely.
And so what happens is next week, next month, next year, they'll be presented by a different situation, different person, different possible scenario. And then they get the same emotional overwhelm because they haven't done the deeper work. And so it's like many of us spend our lives in this pattern of state of emotional overwhelm, then we manage to get rid of it, then we're okay for a while, then we have another state of emotional overwhelm, and it's like our whole lives become punctuated by these stages of panic, overwhelm, fear, and we don't need to live our lives like that.
And that becomes familiar.
Yeah.
That then becomes familiar. A lot of my clients will say, well, it's easier. It's not easier. Don't lie. That's not easier. It's just familiar. And you're in the carousel. This is the carousel of despair, where the other road leads you on your authentic path. That's when you'll be walking in fresh snow. This is just following your path time and time and time again, and you've got to stop it. This is not what you are here for. This is not developing you as a spiritual person. This is very easy. This is not complicated. You are the creator of all your emotions. You are not the victim, and you are accountable for your beliefs. Be accountable for your beliefs. Beliefs are not set in stone. You can change a belief today. Don't say, oh, you can't change beliefs, David. You change beliefs all the time. All of the time you're changing beliefs. Focus on those core beliefs. Not whether you like this brand or that brand. Focus on those core beliefs and take accountability. And if they're not what you want, change them. Make them what you want. Don't care what anybody else thinks. What you want, what you believe, why you believe it.
Thank you, David. Well, I hope this teaching has really given you some insight into that emotional overwhelm that you may experience, how the inner child is involved, what the inner child is trying to do, and how you can step back and take a different path using those 2 key stages we've talked about. So the stop it technique, and then also examining those beliefs using the golden thread process. As I say, I will put links to playlists with more information on our inner child work and our golden thread process work to help you If you have enjoyed this video, please do comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Do share it with someone else who you think would also benefit. And if you'd like to work one-to-one with David on any of the issues we've talked about today, David works by Zoom video call every week with clients all over the world. And I will put a link to more information about David's sessions below. And finally, don't forget, we produce new videos on our YouTube every week. So please do subscribe. We'd love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.